The stranger collapsed on Ryder Sloane's doorstep during the worst dust storm Silver City, New Mexico had seen in the summer of 1877, and when he dragged her inside, she immediately whispered an apology for breathing too loudly in his home. Ryder stood there, dust coating his dark hair and broad shoulders, staring down at the young woman who had just about scared 10 years off his life when he'd nearly tripped over her body. She was barely conscious, her lips cracked and bleeding, her face sunburned to a painful red, and yet somehow she had found the strength to apologize for the simple act of drawing breath in his cabin. "Madam, you can breathe however you need to breathe," he said, his voice rough from years of shouting over cattle drives and harsh winds. "Let me get you some water." She tried to shake her head, but the movement seemed to cost her dearly. Her eyes, a startling green despite their glassy appearance, fluttered closed. Ryder didn't waste another second. He grabbed his canteen and knelt beside her, carefully lifting her head and pressing the rim to her lips. She drank greedily at first, then seemed to remember herself and pulled back, another apology forming on those cracked lips. "Stop that," Ryder said, not unkindly. "Drink all you need." The storm raged outside, battering the sturdy log cabin he'd built with his own hands 3 years ago, when he'd decided ranching was a better life than the one he'd been living. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and sand peppered the windows with a sound like rain. Nobody would be going anywhere until it passed. He managed to get her onto his bed, the only one in the small cabin, and she immediately tried to protest, her voice barely a whisper. "I cannot take your bed, sir. The floor is fine for someone like me." "Someone like you?" Ryder frowned, studying her more carefully now. Her dress, though covered in dust and torn in places, had once been of good quality. Her hands, while sunburned, weren't calloused like a working woman's would be. "Who are you running from?" Fear flashed across her face, quick and unmistakable. She turned her head away, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. "No one, sir. I simply got lost in the storm." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Ryder had learned long ago that everyone had secrets, and pushing too hard too fast was a good way to make someone bolt. He'd wait. The storm would keep her here for at least another day, maybe 2, depending on how fierce it decided to be. "Name's Ryder Sloane," he said instead. "And you're in my home, which means you're under my protection until you're well enough to leave. What do I call you?" She hesitated for a long moment, and he wondered if she'd give him a false name. Finally, she whispered, Stella Carpenter." "Well, Miss Carpenter, you rest now. I'll make some broth. You need food in you." "I don't want to be a burden," she said immediately, that apologetic tone creeping back into her voice. "I'm sorry for imposing on your hospitality. I'll leave as soon as the storm passes." Ryder found himself getting irritated by all the apologizing, though he couldn't quite say why. Maybe because she sounded so genuinely terrified of taking up space, of existing in a way that might inconvenience him. It reminded him of a beaten dog he'd once found on the trail, the way it had cringed away from every kind gesture, expecting cruelty instead. "Miss Carpenter, I'm going to say this once, so listen well. You're hurt and you're sick from the sun. You could have died out there. I'm not the kind of man who turns away someone in need, and I'm certainly not the kind who makes them feel bad for needing help. So stop apologizing for every breath you take and just let me do what's right." She stared at him with those wide green eyes, and he saw something shift in her expression. Not quite trust, but maybe the first fragile beginnings of it. She gave a small nod and closed her eyes again. Ryder set about making broth from the beef he'd been planning to cook for himself, adding in some wild onions and herbs he'd gathered from the hills. The cabin was small but well organized, everything in its place. He had lived alone for so long that he'd developed routines, systems that kept his life orderly even when the world outside was chaos. As he worked, he found his gaze drifting back to the woman in his bed. She'd fallen into an exhausted sleep, her breathing evening out though it still sounded labored. In sleep, her face lost some of that haunted, fearful quality, and he could see that she was probably around 23 or 24, not much younger than his own 28 years. Pretty too, under the sunburn and dust, with delicate features and honey-colored hair that probably shone like gold when it was clean. The storm continued to rage, and Ryder found himself wondering about her story. Women didn't just appear out of dust storms without a reason. They didn't apologize for breathing unless someone had made them feel like their very existence was wrong. And they definitely didn't have that kind of bone-deep fear in their eyes unless they were running from something bad. He'd seen that look before during the war. He'd been just a boy then, barely 17, but old enough to fight. Old enough to see things no one should ever have to see. Old enough to learn that sometimes the monsters weren't strangers on a battlefield, but people who were supposed to love you, protect you, keep you safe. The broth finished cooking as night fell, the storm showing no signs of letting up. Ryder gently woke Stella, helping her sit up against the pillows he'd piled behind her back. She started to apologize again, caught herself, and instead offered him a tentative smile that transformed her whole face. "Thank you," she said instead, "for your kindness." "You're welcome," Ryder replied, settling himself on the chair beside the bed with a bowl of broth for each of them. "Think you can manage some food?" She nodded, taking the bowl with trembling hands. He noticed the way she held it, like it was precious, like she was afraid it might be taken away. She sipped slowly, and he saw tears gather in her eyes. "It's good," she whispered. "Really good. I haven't eaten in 3 days." 3 days? Ryder felt his jaw tighten. 3 days wandering in the desert would explain the sunburn, the dehydration, the exhaustion. But it raised even more questions. Where had she come from? How had she survived? "Were you traveling alone?" he asked carefully. Stella's hands tightened on the bowl. "Yes, I left Albuquerque on foot. I knew it was foolish, but I couldn't stay any longer. I thought I could make it to Silver City, find work maybe, start over. But I underestimated the distance and the heat." "You walked from Albuquerque?" Ryder couldn't keep the shock from his voice. That was nearly 100 miles through some of the harshest terrain in the territory. "Why didn't you take the stage?" "I didn't have money for passage," she said quietly. "And I couldn't risk being seen in a public place. I just needed to disappear." There it was, the confirmation of what he'd already suspected. She was running, and whoever she was running from, they'd scared her badly enough to risk death in the desert rather than face them again. "Who is he?" Ryder asked softly. Stella's head jerked up, fear flooding back into her eyes. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You're running from someone, and I'm guessing it's a man. Husband. Father. Someone else?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Then slowly, she set down the bowl and wrapped her arms around herself, even though the cabin was warm. "My intended," she whispered. "We were to be married next month. He's a merchant in Albuquerque, well-respected, wealthy. Everyone said I was lucky to have caught his attention." "But?" Ryder prompted when she fell silent. "But he wasn't kind when no one was watching," Stella continued, her voice barely audible over the storm. "He would criticize everything I did, the way I walked, the way I talked, the way I breathed. Nothing was ever good enough. And then he started to get physical. Just small things at first. A grip too tight on my arm, a shove when he was angry. But it was getting worse, and I realized that once we were married, once I was legally his property, there would be no escape." Ryder felt a familiar anger kindling in his chest, the same righteous fury that had driven him to enlist all those years ago, the belief that the strong should protect the weak, not prey upon them. "So you ran." "So I ran," she confirmed. "My parents both passed 2 years ago from fever. I have no siblings, no other family. Thomas, my intended, he controlled everything. My inheritance from my parents, my living situation, even my friendships. But I'd been hiding a little money, just small coins here and there that he wouldn't miss. It wasn't enough for stage fare, but it was enough to buy some supplies. I thought I could make it. I thought anything was better than staying. You were right, Ryder said firmly. You made the right choice, and he won't find you here. I promise you that. Stella looked at him searchingly, as if trying to determine whether she could trust this promise. You don't know Thomas. He doesn't like to lose things he considers his. He'll search for me. Let him search. Silver City is a long way from Albuquerque, and this cabin is even farther from town. Besides, I meant what I said. You're under my protection now. Something in his tone must have convinced her because she relaxed slightly, reaching for the broth again. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the storm providing a constant backdrop of sound. Tell me about yourself, Stella said eventually. It's only fair since you know my sad story. Ryder shrugged, uncomfortable with talking about himself. Not much to tell. I ranch cattle, breed horses, mind my own business. It's a simple life, but it's mine. You fought in the war, she said, and it wasn't a question. I can see it in your eyes. My father fought too. He had that same look sometimes, like he was seeing things the rest of us couldn't. I did, Ryder admitted. Signed up when I was 17, thought I was going to be a hero. Learned real quick that war doesn't make heroes, just survivors and ghosts. I came out here afterward because I needed space, needed quiet, needed to build something instead of destroying. Do you have family? A brother back in Texas. We write sometimes, but we're not close. Parents died when we were young, and we were raised by an uncle who believed children should be seen and not heard. We learned early to keep to ourselves. Stella nodded slowly. So we're both alone then, both trying to outrun our pasts. I suppose we are, Ryder agreed. Though I'd say you're doing a braver thing than I ever did. I just wanted peace. You're fighting for your life, for your freedom. That takes courage. She ducked her head, color rising in her cheeks despite the sunburn. I don't feel very courageous. I feel terrified most of the time. Even now, in your home where you've been nothing but kind, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. I keep thinking you'll turn cruel, or demand payment for your help, or decide to send me back. I won't do any of those things, Ryder said quietly. I know you don't know me well enough to trust that yet, but I hope in time you'll see it's true. I don't hurt women. I don't take advantage of people in need, and I sure as hell don't send them back to men who've hurt them. Stella met his eyes, and he saw that fragile trust growing stronger. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me. Because it's the right thing to do, Ryder said simply. And because I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong anywhere, like you're always one wrong move away from disaster. I wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone. The storm raged for 2 more days, keeping them confined to the cabin. Ryder slept on the floor despite Stella's protests, using his bedroll and saddle blanket. During the day, they talked, sharing stories, and slowly getting to know each other. Stella told him about her childhood in Santa Fe, how her father had been a school teacher and her mother a seamstress, how they'd moved to Albuquerque when she was 15, seeking better opportunities, how they died within days of each other during the fever outbreak, leaving her alone and vulnerable. Ryder shared his own memories more reluctantly, talking about growing up in Texas, about his brother Marcus, who'd become a lawyer and stayed back east, about the uncle who'd raised them with strict rules and little affection, about the war and its aftermath, the years of drifting before he'd found his way to New Mexico and decided to put down roots. By the time the storm finally broke on the 3rd day, they'd become friends. Ryder found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the way Stella's face lit up when she laughed, to the intelligent observations she made about everything from the books on his shelf to the way he'd constructed his cabin. She'd stopped apologizing for every little thing, though he still caught her doing it sometimes, that automatic flinch of someone who'd been conditioned to believe they were always in the way. Each time he'd gently remind her that she had nothing to apologize for, and each time she'd give him that small, grateful smile that made something warm unfurl in his chest. When the sun finally emerged, bright and merciless, Stella was strong enough to stand on her own. Her sunburn had begun to heal, fading from angry red to a more manageable pink. She'd borrowed one of Ryder's shirts and a pair of his pants, rolled up at the ankles, since her dress had been too damaged to wear. "I should go into town," she said, though Ryder noticed she didn't sound particularly eager. "Try to find work, a place to stay." "You could stay here," Ryder heard himself say, before he'd really thought it through. "I mean, just until you're fully recovered and have a better plan. The cabin's small, but there's room, and I could use help with the horses if you're willing to work for your keep." Stella turned to look at him, surprise written all over her face. "You'd let me stay?" But people would talk. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, it wouldn't be proper. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and they mind their own business. As for town, well, we can figure out a story if we need to. You could be my cousin, visiting from back east. "Why would you do this?" Stella asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. "You've already done so much. You saved my life. You don't owe me anything more." Ryder thought about that, about why he was making this offer. Part of it was practical. He did need help around the ranch, and Stella seemed like she'd be a hard worker once she was fully recovered, but there was more to it than that. In the 3 days they'd spent together, he'd felt more alive than he had in years. The cabin that had always seemed like a peaceful refuge now felt lonely when he imagined her gone. "Maybe I'm being selfish," he admitted. "It's been nice having someone to talk to, someone to share meals with. I didn't realize how isolated I'd become until you showed up. And I like you, Stella. I like your company. If you want to stay, I'd be glad to have you." She studied his face for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw there. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I'd like to stay, at least for a while, but I insist on earning my keep. I won't be a burden." "Partners, then," Ryder said, extending his hand. "Equal share in the work, equal share in the benefits." Stella took his hand, her grip firm despite her smaller size. "Partners," she agreed. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt natural, comfortable. Stella proved to be a quick learner and a tireless worker. Ryder taught her how to handle the horses, how to mend fences, how to read the weather and the land. In return, she brought order to the domestic side of the ranch, cooking meals that were far better than anything Ryder had managed on his own, mending his worn clothes, organizing his chaotic collection of supplies. But more than that, she brought light to his life. She sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. She asked questions about everything, genuinely curious about the world around her. She challenged his opinions and made him laugh with her dry observations about the absurdities of life. And slowly, so gradually that Ryder almost didn't notice it happening, he began to fall in love with her. It wasn't like anything he'd experienced before. There had been women over the years, brief encounters that meant little and were quickly forgotten. But this was different. This was watching Stella's face light up when she successfully calmed a skittish horse. This was the way his heart lifted when he came in from the fields and saw her waiting on the porch. This was lying awake at night on his bedroll, listening to her breathe in the bed across the room and feeling grateful just knowing she was there. He didn't say anything, didn't want to risk scaring her away or making her feel obligated. She'd been through enough without him adding the complication of his feelings. But it got harder every day to keep it to himself, especially when he'd catch her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. 2 months after Stella's arrival, Ryder had to make a trip into Silver City for supplies. He asked if she wanted to come along, and she'd agreed, though he could see the nervousness in her eyes. They'd concocted a story that she was his cousin from St. Louis, come west for her health. It was flimsy, but it would serve. The town was busy, miners and ranchers and railroad workers all going about their business. Ryder noticed the way men's eyes followed Stella, appreciative and curious. She stayed close to his side, her hand occasionally brushing his arm as if to reassure herself he was still there. They were leaving the general store, arms full of supplies, when they nearly collided with a well-dressed man coming through the door. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with slicked-back dark hair and cold gray eyes. He looked at Stella, looked away, then looked back sharply. Ryder felt Stella freeze beside him, her breath catching audibly. The color drained from her face. "Stella," the man said, his voice smooth and cultured. "Stella Carpenter, is that really you?" "Thomas, it had to be." Ryder saw the terror flash across Stella's face and stepped slightly in front of her, his body language making it clear she was under his protection. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Ryder said evenly. "This is my cousin, Sarah Stone, from St. Louis." Thomas's eyes narrowed, flicking from Stella to Ryder and back again. "Is that so? How interesting. Because she looks exactly like my runaway fiancé, who disappeared 3 months ago without so much as a note, caused me quite a bit of trouble and expense searching for her." "Then you wasted your money," Ryder said, his voice hard, "because this lady is my cousin, and she's been in Silver City for the past 6 weeks. Plenty of people in town can verify that." It was a bluff, but Ryder sold it with confidence. Thomas studied him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether to push the issue. Ryder held his ground, meeting the other man's gaze steadily. He'd faced down Confederate soldiers and stampeding cattle. He wasn't about to be intimidated by some merchant bully. "My mistake," Thomas finally said, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe it for a second. "Though if you do happen to encounter Stella Carpenter in your travels, do let her know that I'd very much like to speak with her. There are matters that need to be settled." "I'll keep that in mind," Ryder said dryly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a long ride ahead." He guided Stella past Thomas and out to where their wagon waited. She was shaking. He could feel it when he helped her up onto the seat. He loaded the supplies quickly, aware of Thomas watching them from the doorway of the store, and then climbed up beside her. They were a mile out of town before Stella finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "He knows. He recognized me. He'll come after me now." "Let him try," Ryder said grimly. "He'll find the ranch a lot harder to reach than a store in town, and he'll find me a lot less accommodating than he might expect. You don't understand. Thomas is vindictive. He won't let this go. He'll find a way to force me back, to make me honor our engagement. He has lawyers, connections, money." "What do we have?" "We have the truth," Ryder said, "and we have right on our side. You're not his property, Stella, no matter what he thinks. You're a free woman, and you made the choice to leave him. That's your right. The law doesn't always see it that way," Stella said bitterly. "Women are expected to honor their commitments, to obey their fathers and husbands, and intended. I broke our engagement without permission. He could sue me for breach of promise, take everything I have." "You don't have anything," Ryder pointed out. "He already took your inheritance." "He could still make my life miserable. He could spread rumors, ruin any chance I have of finding work or building a new life. He could make it so no one would be willing to help me." Ryder was quiet for a moment, thinking hard. Then he said carefully, "There is one way to make sure he has no legal claim on you." Stella turned to look at him, confusion in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "If you were married to someone else, he'd have no standing. The engagement would be void, and there'd be nothing he could do about it." Understanding dawned on her face, followed quickly by something that might have been hope. "Are you suggesting we get married? A fake marriage?" "Not fake," Ryder said quietly. "Real in the eyes of the law. It would protect you from Thomas, give you legal standing as my wife, and it would solve the problem of you living at the ranch. No more pretending you're my cousin." "But that's not fair to you," Stella protested. "You'd be tied to me, stuck with me. What if you meet someone you actually want to marry?" Ryder pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Stella, I need you to understand something. This isn't a sacrifice for me. Over the past 2 months, you've become the best part of my day. I look forward to seeing you in the morning. I enjoy our conversations. I admire your strength and your kindness and your spirit. If you agree to marry me, it won't be me doing you a favor. It'll be you doing me one." Stella's eyes were wide, searching his face. "Do you mean that? Truly?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Ryder said. "I know it's fast, and I know it's not exactly a romantic proposal, but I care about you, Stella, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. And if you'll have me, I promise I'll spend every day trying to be the kind of man you deserve." A tear slipped down Stella's cheek, but she was smiling. "You already are that man. Ryder, you've been nothing but good to me from the moment we met. You've never made me feel small or wrong or like I was too much. You told me I could breathe however I needed to, and you meant it. You gave me back my freedom, my sense of self. How could I not care about you, too?" "Is that a yes?" Ryder asked, hardly daring to hope. "That's a yes," Stella confirmed, and then she was in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Ryder held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling like the luckiest man alive. They were married 3 days later by the circuit judge who happened to be passing through Silver City. It was a simple ceremony, with the general store owner and his wife serving as witnesses. Stella wore a new dress that Ryder had insisted on buying, pale blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Ryder wore his best shirt and vest, his dark hair still damp from the bath he'd taken at the barber shop. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Ryder kissed Stella gently, reverently, and felt her kiss him back with a sweetness that made his chest ache. They signed the marriage certificate, making it legal and official, and then they went to the land office to record Stella's new name and her status as Ryder's wife. Thomas was nowhere to be seen, but Ryder knew word would reach him eventually. The man would be furious, but there was nothing he could do now. Stella was protected, safe, beyond his reach. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. Stella sat close to Ryder on the wagon seat, her hand in his, her head occasionally resting on his shoulder. When they arrived home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Home," Stella said softly, and Ryder heard the wonder in her voice. "I have a home again, a real home." "Our home," Ryder corrected gently. "Everything I have is yours now, Stella. The ranch, the cabin, all of it. We're partners, remember?" She turned to him, her eyes shining. "I love you, Ryder Sloane. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between you saving my life and teaching me to ride and making me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how, I fell completely in love with you." "I love you too," Ryder said, the words feeling right and true. "Have for weeks now, if I'm being honest. Just didn't want to push. Didn't want to make you feel pressured." "You never made me feel pressured," Stella said. "You made me feel valued, safe, like I mattered." "You do matter," Ryder said fiercely. "More than anything." He carried her over the threshold of the cabin, both of them laughing at the silliness and the sweetness of it. Inside, everything looked the same and yet completely different. This wasn't just his cabin anymore. It was theirs, the beginning of their life together. That night, they lay together in the bed that had been Stella's but was now shared. Ryder held her close, her head on his chest, her hand over his heart. They talked until late, making plans for the future, dreaming about what they could build together. "I want to expand the horse breeding," Ryder said. "Build a real stable, get some quality mares. There's good money in it, and I think we could make a name for ourselves." "I'd like to start a garden," Stella added. "A big one with vegetables and herbs. Maybe some flowers, too. And I've been thinking about those books you have. What if we started a little lending library? People around here don't have much access to books. We could share what we have, maybe trade for others." "I like that," Ryder said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I like the idea of making this place something more than just a ranch. A real home, a gathering place maybe. A place where people are welcome," Stella agreed. "Where they can breathe however they need to." Ryder smiled in the darkness, remembering that first day, The way she'd apologized for something so fundamental, so necessary as breathing. Always, he promised. In our home, everyone can just be themselves. The months that followed were the happiest of Ryder's life. He and Stella worked side by side every day, building their ranch and their life together. They acquired 3 new mares and a fine stallion, starting the breeding program Ryder had dreamed about. Stella's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables that she sold in town, building her own little nest egg. The lending library became a reality too, with neighbors starting to stop by to borrow books and trade stories. It turned out Stella had a gift for making people feel comfortable, for drawing them out and making them laugh. The cabin that had once been a lonely refuge became a hub of activity and friendship. Thomas made one attempt to cause trouble, sending a lawyer to Silver City with documents claiming Stella had stolen money from him when she left. But Ryder had anticipated something like this and had hired his own lawyer, a sharp young man named Daniel Morris, who tore apart Thomas's claims with ruthless efficiency. The case was dismissed, and Thomas was ordered to pay court costs. After that, they heard nothing more from him. Winter came, cold and stark, but the cabin was warm and full of love. Ryder would come in from the cold to find Stella cooking dinner, humming to herself, and his heart would swell with gratitude for the life they'd built. They'd sit by the fire in the evenings, Stella reading aloud, while Ryder worked on leather or wood, the comfortable companionship of 2 people who genuinely enjoyed being together. Spring brought new foals and the first vegetables from the garden. It also brought news that Stella was pregnant, a discovery that filled them both with joy and a little fear. They were going to be parents, responsible for a new life. It seemed momentous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. What if I'm not good at it? Stella worried one night, her hand on her still flat stomach. What if I don't know how to be a mother? Then we'll figure it out together, Ryder assured her. Just like we figured out everything else, and I have no doubt you'll be amazing. You're kind and patient and loving. Our child will be lucky to have you. To have us, Stella corrected. This baby will have both of us, and that's more than many children can say. As Stella's pregnancy progressed, Ryder found himself becoming increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, do less of the heavy work. She protested at first, not wanting to be treated like she was fragile, but eventually agreed to a compromise. She'd handle the lighter tasks and let him take care of the more strenuous ones. The baby arrived on a crisp October morning in 1878, after a labor that terrified Ryder more than anything he'd faced in the war. The midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson, shooed him outside at one point when his pacing was driving everyone crazy. He'd stood on the porch, listening to Stella's cries, feeling utterly helpless and praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in that she'd be all right. When the baby's cry finally rang out, strong and lusty, Ryder nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, smiling broadly. You have a son, Mr. Sloane, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing just fine. Ryder rushed inside to find Stella propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes and said, "Come meet your son." The baby was perfect, with a full head of dark hair like Ryder's and what promised to be Stella's green eyes. He had a strong grip and healthy lungs, which he demonstrated by wailing whenever he was set down. What should we name him? Stella asked, gently rocking the baby. Ryder thought about it, about all the people who'd shaped his life. What about William, after my grandfather? Will for short. William Sloane, Stella tested it out. I like it. Hello, William. Welcome to the world, little one. Fatherhood changed Ryder in ways he hadn't expected. He'd always been a patient man, but now he discovered reserves of tenderness he hadn't known he possessed. He'd walk the floor for hours with Will when the baby was fussy, singing off key lullabies his own mother had once sung to him. He'd watch Stella nurse their son and feel overwhelmed with love for both of them. As Will grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Word had spread about the quality of Ryder's horses, and buyers came from as far away as Texas and Colorado. The breeding program was a success, and they were able to hire a young ranch hand named Charlie to help with the increased workload. Stella's garden expanded too, and she began preserving and selling her produce in town. She also started teaching some of the neighboring women to read, holding informal classes in the cabin once a week. It made Ryder proud to see how she'd blossomed, how she'd taken the freedom he'd helped her find and used it to build something meaningful. When Will was 2 years old, Stella became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and when their second child arrived in the spring of 1881, it was a daughter with Stella's honey-colored hair and a disposition that could only be described as sunny. "Emma," Stella said the moment she saw her. "She looks like an Emma." "Emma it is," Ryder agreed, cradling his tiny daughter and marveling at how different she felt from Will, how each child was their own person from the very beginning. The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. Will grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. Emma was more social, more outgoing, always chattering and making up elaborate games. When Will was 6 and Emma was 4, they welcomed a third child, another boy they named James, who seemed to have inherited the best qualities of both his siblings. The ranch had grown substantially. They'd built a proper stable, expanded the cabin into a real house with multiple bedrooms, and acquired more land. Ryder had achieved the success he'd dreamed of, but more importantly, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for: a family, a purpose, a home in the truest sense of the word. One evening, when the children were asleep and Ryder and Stella sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to him and said, "Do you ever think about that day I collapsed on your doorstep? How different our lives would be if you'd turned me away?" "I think about it sometimes," Ryder admitted, "but I can't really imagine turning you away. It felt right from the beginning, helping you, like it was meant to be." "I was so scared," Stella remembered. "Not just of dying in the desert, but of living. I'd convinced myself I was worthless, that I deserved whatever Thomas dished out. And then you told me I could breathe however I needed to, and it was like you gave me permission to exist, to take up space, to be human." "You always had that right," Ryder said gently. "I just reminded you of it." "You did more than that. You showed me what love actually looks like. Not control or possession or cruelty disguised as care, but real love, partnership, respect, freedom." Ryder pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You taught me things too. How to let someone in, how to share my life, how to be part of something bigger than myself. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me want to really live." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out one by one. In the house behind them, their children slept safely in their beds. In the stable, the horses nickered softly to each other. On the land around them, everything they'd built together stood as testament to what two broken people could create when they found each other. "I love you, Ryder Sloane," Stella said softly. "More today than yesterday, and I'll love you even more tomorrow." "I love you too," Ryder replied. "Always have, always will." Years continued to pass in a blur of activity and joy. Will grew into a capable young man who took over more and more of the ranch responsibilities, showing a natural talent for training horses. Emma discovered a passion for teaching and began helping her mother with the literacy classes, which had grown to include both children and adults from all over the county. James, the youngest, was still finding his way, but showed promise as a storyteller and artist, always drawing and writing tales of adventure. The ranch became known throughout New Mexico, not just for quality horses, but as a place of hospitality and learning. Travelers knew they could stop at the Sloane Ranch and find a warm meal and a friendly welcome. The lending library had grown to hundreds of books donated by people from all over, and Stella had organized it into a proper system that would have impressed any city librarian. Ryder and Stella also became known for helping people in need. More than once, A young woman running from a bad situation would find her way to their door, and Stella would take her in, give her a safe place to stay, help her find her feet. Some moved on eventually, while others settled in the area, building new lives for themselves. Ryder never questioned it, never complained about the extra mouths to feed or the complications it sometimes brought. He understood what it meant to be given a second chance, and he was determined to pay that forward whenever he could. One such woman was a young widow named Margaret, who arrived with two small children and a story about an abusive husband who thankfully died in a mining accident. Stella helped her find work in town and a small house to rent. Years later, Margaret married the town doctor and became one of Stella's closest friends, their children growing up together like cousins. When Ryder turned 50 in 1899, the whole community turned out for a celebration. It was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard, music provided by a fiddle player from town, and enough food to feed an army. Will, now 21 and courting a sweet girl named Anne, gave a toast that had Ryder blinking back tears. "My father taught me what it means to be a good man," Will said, raising his glass, "not through lectures or rules, but through example. He showed me how to work hard, how to treat people with respect, how to stand up for what's right. But most importantly, he showed me what real love looks like through the way he loves our mother. That's the kind of marriage I want, the kind of partnership they have. So here's to Ryder Sloane, the best father and the best man I've ever known." The crowd cheered, and Ryder felt Stella's hand slip into his, squeezing tight. He looked at her, his wife of over 20 years, and saw that she was crying happy tears. "We did all right, didn't we?" he murmured to her. "We did better than all right," Stella replied. "We built something beautiful." Emma married a young lawyer from Santa Fe when she was 22, a sharp-minded man named David, who shared her passion for education and social reform. They settled in the capital city, but visited the ranch often, eventually bringing Ryder and Stella 3 grandchildren who loved nothing more than spending summers at their grandparents' ranch. James, true to his artistic nature, ended up working for a newspaper in Albuquerque, writing stories and drawing illustrations. He never married, but seemed perfectly content with his bachelor life, traveling throughout the Southwest and sending long, entertaining letters home about his adventures. Will married Anne and built a house on the ranch property, taking over the day-to-day operations as Ryder began to slow down. They had 4 children in quick succession, filling the ranch with noise and laughter and chaos. Ryder loved being a grandfather, loved spoiling the little ones and watching them grow. In the early 1900s, when Ryder was in his mid-50s and Stella in her early 50s, they took a trip they'd always dreamed about. They traveled to San Francisco, seeing the ocean for the first time, staying in a fancy hotel, eating in fine restaurants. It was a grand adventure, but Ryder was glad to get back home, back to the land and the life they'd built. "I thought I might like city life," he told Stella as they approached the ranch. "But turns out I'm a country boy through and through." "Me too," Stella agreed. "Though it was fun to see how the other half lives, makes me appreciate what we have even more." As they got older, Ryder and Stella settled into a comfortable routine. They'd wake with the sun, share coffee on the porch, and spend their days working at a gentler pace. Stella still tended her garden, though it was smaller now. Ryder still worked with the horses, though he left the breaking and training to Will and the younger hands. They read together in the evenings, played with their grandchildren when they visited, and enjoyed the peaceful life they'd earned. One day, when Ryder was 62, he came in from the stable to find Stella sitting at the kitchen table, a letter in her hands and tears streaming down her face. His heart seized with fear, but then he saw she was smiling through the tears. "What is it?" he asked, hurrying to her side. "It's from a lawyer in Albuquerque," Stella said, her voice shaking. "Thomas died. Apparently he never married, and he had no other family. His will leaves everything to me, along with a letter." "Do you want to read it?" Ryder asked carefully. Stella nodded and unfolded the letter with trembling hands. She read it silently first, then aloud for Ryder's benefit. "Stella, if you're reading this, I've passed on to whatever comes next. I hope it's nothing, because I doubt I'll find much comfort in the hereafter. I'm writing this because I owe you an apology, though I know it's far too late to matter. You were right to run from me. I was a cruel man, a small man who tried to make himself feel big by making you feel small. I realized that too late, after you were gone. I tried to find you, not to bring you back, but to apologize. But you disappeared completely, and eventually I heard you'd married a rancher and were happy. I'm glad for that. I never remarried because it seemed wrong to inflict myself on another woman. Instead, I've lived alone with my regrets. My fortune, such as it is, goes to you. Use it however you wish. Consider it repayment for the inheritance I stole and the pain I caused. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I knew I was wrong. Thomas. Stella set the letter down, wiping at her tears. I never thought he'd acknowledge what he did. I certainly never expected this. What do you want to do with the money? Ryder asked. Stella thought for a moment, then said, I want to use it to help other women. Women like I was, trapped in bad situations with no way out. We could set up a fund, provide money for stage fare, or supplies for those who need to escape. We could work with the churches and charitable organizations to make sure women know there are options. That's a beautiful idea, Ryder said, pride swelling in his chest. You'd be saving lives, just like I saved yours all those years ago. We'd be saving lives, Stella corrected. Together, like we do everything. They established the fund, working with churches and women's organizations throughout New Mexico and beyond. Over the years, it helped hundreds of women escape dangerous situations and start new lives. Stella personally corresponded with many of them, offering advice and encouragement, sharing her own story to give them hope. As Ryder entered his late 60s, his health began to decline. Nothing serious, just the general wearing out that came with age and a lifetime of hard work. He tired more easily, his joints ached on cold mornings, and he moved a bit slower than he once had. But he was content, surrounded by family and friends, still able to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1917, their children and grandchildren threw them a party. The whole community came, filling the ranch with noise and celebration. Someone had even tracked down the circuit judge who'd married them, now ancient but still spry, and he gave a toast about young love and lasting commitment. Ryder stood to say a few words, Stella at his side, looking beautiful despite the silver in her hair and the lines on her face. To him, she was still the frightened young woman who'd collapsed on his doorstep, still the brave soul who'd risked everything for freedom, still the love of his life. 40 years ago, I met this woman under unusual circumstances, he began, and the crowd laughed. Everyone knew the story by now. It had become part of local legend. She apologized for breathing too loud in my home. I told her she could breathe however she needed to. At the time, I had no idea how prophetic those words would be. Stella, you've filled my life with breath, with life, with joy. You've given me children and grandchildren, a home that's more than just a building, a purpose beyond just surviving. You've made me a better man than I ever would have been on my own. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and I'll love you even more 40 years from now if we're blessed with that much time. I'll hold you to that, Stella said, kissing him to the cheers and applause of the crowd. Ryder lived to see his 75th birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. He died peacefully in his sleep on a warm spring night in 1922, Stella holding his hand, Will and Emma and James gathered around the bed. Stella lived another 8 years, staying on the ranch Will now ran, spoiling her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, continuing her literacy work and her fund for women in need. She spoke often of Ryder, keeping his memory alive through stories and laughter. When she finally passed in 1930, it was with a smile on her face and his name on her lips. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a big cottonwood tree they'd planted together in their first year of marriage. The headstone read simply, Ryder and Stella Sloane, partners in life, together in death. They taught us how to breathe freely. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each new steward adding their own touches while preserving the spirit of hospitality and kindness that Ryder and Stella had established. The lending library became a permanent fixture, eventually expanding into a small community center. The fund for women in need continued, growing and evolving to meet changing times. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right through the cottonwood tree, people swore they could hear laughter, the kind that comes from two people who'd found in each other exactly what they'd been searching for, even when they hadn't known they were searching at all. The story of Ryder and Stella became more than just family history. It became a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. That kindness can change everything. That telling someone they can breathe however they need to is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. That real love isn't about possession or control, but about freedom and partnership and building something beautiful together. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the land, still raised horses, still welcomed strangers who needed help. They told the story of how it all began, how their great-great-grandmother had collapsed on their great-great-grandfather's doorstep during a dust storm, apologized for breathing too loud, and how he'd told her she could breathe however she needed. It seemed like such a small thing, that first exchange. But from that small beginning had grown something remarkable, a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, a legacy of kindness that touched countless lives. And really, wasn't that what life was all about? Taking the moments you're given, even the scary, uncertain ones, and transforming them into something meaningful. Finding someone who sees you, really sees you, and loves you not despite your fears and flaws, but because they understand them. Building a home that's more than walls and a roof, but a place where people can truly be themselves, where they can breathe freely without apology or fear. Ryder and Stella had done that. They'd taken their individual pain and trauma, and instead of letting it destroy them, had used it to create something healing, something good. They'd turned a moment of desperate need into a lifetime of love. They'd shown everyone around them what was possible when you led with compassion, when you stood up for what was right, when you refused to let the darkness of the past determine the brightness of the future. Their story lived on, not just in the memories of their descendants, but in the very fabric of the community they'd helped build. It lived on in every woman who found the courage to leave a bad situation because she knew there was help available. It lived on in every child who learned to read in the community center that bore their name. It lived on in every person who stopped at the ranch and found a warm welcome, no questions asked, no judgment rendered. And perhaps most importantly, it lived on in the understanding that sometimes the most profound act of love is simply giving someone permission to exist exactly as they are, to breathe however they need to breathe, to take up space without apology, to be imperfect and scared and human, and to be loved anyway. That was what Ryder had given Stella on that first day, and what she had given him in return. That was the foundation upon which they'd built everything else, and that was the gift they'd passed down through the generations, a legacy far more valuable than land or money or success. The ranch still stood strong more than 100 years after Ryder had built that first small cabin. The big cottonwood tree on the hill had grown massive, its branches providing shade and shelter to those who came to visit the graves beneath it. Couples getting married sometimes held their ceremonies there, wanting to invoke the blessing of that legendary love story. Parents brought their children to teach them about their heritage, about the importance of kindness and courage, and on summer evenings, when the sky turned that particular shade of gold that New Mexico does so well, you could almost see them there on the porch of the old house. A cowboy with dark hair and kind eyes, and a woman with honey-colored hair and a smile that lit up the world. You could almost hear their laughter, their conversations, the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other completely. They'd started with so little, just a frightened woman and a kind man and a simple truth. Everyone deserves to breathe freely. From that, they'd built a love story for the ages, proof that the best endings often come from the most difficult beginnings, and that sometimes the greatest adventure is simply finding someone to share your life with, building a home together, and filling it with love. That was the story of Ryder and Stella Sloane, the cowboy and the woman who apologized for breathing, and how they created something that would last long after they were gone. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about the power of kindness and the strength of love, about breathing freely and living fully and building something that matters. And it was a story that would continue, passed down from generation to generation, inspiring others to be brave, to be kind, to stand up for what's right, and to never ever make someone apologize for simply being alive. Because in the end, that's what it all came down to. The radical revolutionary act of letting people breathe however they need to breathe and loving them through it all.